Anyway, thank you and welcome again. Appreciate it. This is an abbreviation. I'm actually going to cut a bunch of my slides out. This is a presentation that a colleague of mine and myself do at, this is our traveling roadshow for the year. And Carl couldn't make it, so we're going to go through it. But I wanted to get some time to do some demos this afternoon. So I am going to cut a bunch of the slides. I'm just going to skip through them. All the slides will be in the presentation that will be up on the MPICT website. So I'm going to cut out a lot of the technical wireless stuff that probably is very familiar to most of you. Okay, first of all, a couple of book publishers that have been very, very happy to provide us with new material, both the CWNA Guide by Mark Sciampa and the Wireless Study Guide from Cybex. Both are very, very good books. These are the books that we use in our classes. And Carl and I have both taught the class that this presentation is based off of just this last semester as well. Okay, so wireless LANs. Never heard of wireless? Don't know what it is? No clue? Not needed? Yeah, right. Anyway, the IEEE has done a major job in keeping the wireless protocol alive and active. Starting in the early 90s, the IEEE set up a whole bunch of new protocols, starting with the base 802.11 series. And since then we have a whole cacophony of alphabet soup behind it. We have A, B, G, N, I, AC, you name it. In fact, they probably will be going into BA, BB, BCs as we go along. So the 802.11 spec was simply set out by the IEEE to specify that we can have wireless data transmissions over either infrared or radio frequency. The original spec, the 802.11 spec by itself, called for a 1 to 2 megabit per second transmission rate. Now since then we have of course accelerated it greatly. Now this is a little bit of an interesting one. The IEEE names their subcommittees, the A group, the B group, the C group, the D group, and so on, in order of assignment. So the A side of the protocol was the first proposal that was sent out, the first group that was created. But the 802.11b group, which was right after that, got there first. They finished their spec first, so that became the more dominant. You'll often hear it referred to as the first wireless protocol. Well, the A was the first assigned, the B was the first that was actually accepted and put into play. We're not talking a great deal of time, but that's just one of those Jeopardy questions that you might get in class. The original 802.11b spec was what we knew. It was 11 megabits per second at highest speed, and then the farther away and the lower the sensitivity to the antennas, the speed would drop. And it would drop by half, 5.5, then it would drop down from there. 2.4 GSM, or excuse me, ISM band, which is the same bandwidth that almost every non-regulated wireless device uses. So walkie-talkies, cordless phones, all of this stuff was in that band. Very, very crowded. So that's one of the reasons why the newer specs, 802.11n and now AC, are moving into the 5 gigahertz, which I'll talk about in just a second. 802.11a was released after 802.11b, even though it was assigned first. It is not nearly as congested. The uniband is also a non-regulated. Now, non-regulated simply means you don't have to have a license to use it. Now, the devices themselves are registered with the FCC. They actually have FCC registrations. So it's not completely unregulated, it's the use of. And as long as you keep below the 100 milliwatt maximum set out by the FCC, you can use it for anything you want. Theoretical throughput of 54 megabits per second. We are actually getting it, but you've got to be pretty close to the antenna to get the full speed. Even though your laptops and your other devices say, oh, I'm running at 54 gig, or 54 megahertz, excuse me, 54 megabits. If you actually measured it using something like a speed test program, you would find you're probably getting something a little bit less than that, even though your computer or your other mobile device is registering a higher speed. It does a different modulation technique. That was how it was able to get the faster speeds. Question. Sure.
This is kind of misleading, right? Throughput is 54 megabits theoretical, but it's essentially half duplex.
Yes.
So isn't the throughput really half of that?
If you wanted to measure, yes, it would be, because what you're doing is it's 54 megabits, but you can't go both directions simultaneously.
Right. So this is marketing speed versus reality.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, isn't 54 megabits really a more, and I'm going to, it's more of a marketing term because wireless is a half duplex system. You can transmit and receive, but not at the same time. So therefore, in reality, it is only a 36.
So let me just kind
36, I'm sorry, 27, I'm sorry.
So do you,
I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a math major.
So do you, because these are your slides, do you make that clear to students? And
you know, that's the first time I've ever actually had the question asked. No, I haven't.
The reason I bring this up is because I have some buddies that actually do this for a job, for a living. And I'll give you a little additional information. But they're telling me that everybody expects to have 54 throughput. And they're saying, wait a minute, that's not true. You're getting half of that.
Right.
When they're designing and architecting.
The comment, just so I can, for the recording, the comment was, this should be brought up in a classroom environment because the reality of it is that you are not getting true 54 megabit. You are getting the 54 megabit in one direction, but since you have to wait for the replies, it's going to be significantly less.
Yeah, I always thought that throughput was measured unidirectionally, not as full duplex.
Question was, I always thought that throughput was measured unidirectionally, so that it would have the 54 megabit unidirectional throughput.
The drop is based on the fact that there's so much arbitration going on. You never get that much actual data going across it.
No, it has to act back. When the packet gets sent, it needs to act back before the next one is sent. So you have dead air.
Let's go on. I just, because we have a very short.
So let me give you something else. You want me to?
Let me go. Yeah. 802.11g again was the better. They tried to match the throughput of 802.11a. So it was 54 megabits per second. Again, theoretical at the if you had absolutely perfect signal. It more operates in the 20 to 25 is more frequently seen, but it runs in the 2.4, so it's compatible, backwards compatible with 802.11b. So B's and G's are compatible, but there is something that is kind of never talked about in the B and G world. As if you had all G devices, you had an access point that was running G, your devices were running G, and you throw one B device into the mix, everybody drops to B speed. You can't run you can't run 54 and the 11 at the same time. So everybody dropped. They never said that.
But only for the first few frames. The access point announces, I've got a B in my environment, okay, and I've got G's, and then it makes an announcement. And now the B's go to sleep, and then you can turn then your speed goes up to G rates. That's the way it works.
Okay. The comment was that everybody drops to B for only a few frames. After all of the reassociations, everything comes back up again. Thank you. 802.11n. This took the longest period of time to get ratified. The initial N spec was announced in September 2009, and I think it was just last year, correct me if I'm wrong, when the ink actually dried on the actual specification. Before that, everybody was running draft N, pre-N, whatever, and then with the hope that if there was a lot of changes in the final draft that there would be firmware upgrades to all the devices. The N was very, very good. It actually operates in both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. It has a theoretical upper maximum of 600 megabits per second. Has anybody gotten 600 on N? You have? One person got at 600. The best I've been able to get, and I was less than a foot away from the antenna, I was able to get 350. And that was about the best I could get.
That's on the router, but I don't know that. I never measured.
Oh yeah, well, no, my router actually had a 600 megabit supposed, again, 600 on both sides, and I could only get 350. And I was like right on top of the antennas.
So Bill, is that what you should expect, 350?
I don't think you should expect it.
Because that's half a 6.
Well, now we're talking about the throughput measured. I was only measuring it from one direction, obviously. So I was getting, yeah. 802.11 is backwards compatible with G and B if you have the multi-radios. There are a few N devices that only have the 5 gigahertz, and therefore there would not be a compatibility. There are 2 radios. Now if you're running N, what you can do is you can run the N on one of the 2, and you can run BG on the other radio built into the unit, if you happen to have a dual radio AP.
But some radios will only transmit on one.
Correct. If there's only one radio in the...
If you have 2 radios, only one can transmit. You can't transmit simultaneously.
That's true. But they can ping pong.
Yeah, right.
They can ping pong.
But there's some models that will transmit simultaneously in both.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. Okay, now this is one of the game changers that N brought to the game. Actually, it started to appear before N, but N is where it really started to appear, and that's MIMO. Multiple in, multiple out. What happens is you gain throughput by pumping out the signal through different antennas that are slightly tuned differently in some ways, so that you are basically bouncing it off and you're taking advantage of multiple pathways through the network. But it's always a one-to-one. One communication to one device, AP to device, one at a time. And everybody has to take turns.
Are they doing that by running on different channels? Or
no, they are running on the same channels. It's slightly, the antennas, in other words, the beam width, or the beam forming is slightly different between the antennas. So it's actually taking different pathways through the network, but on the same channel. So this is how they do it. It's called spatial diversity. Multiple redundant signals are sent out of the antennas, and then using a form of multiplexing, what they're doing is that they're actually splitting it up, kind of like the old time division multiplexing, frequency division multiplexing that we got to know and love in serial is the same thing, where they're putting, if let's say there's 3 antennas and they're doing it that way, they're basically getting 3 times the throughput, even though each antenna is only broadcasting at a set speed. So there's actually this mechanism. Now, I am not a physicist. I do not pretend to be one, not an RF expert, but I know it does work, and it does help when you're trying to set up your APs. And if you can get MIMO working well, it's really, really a cool thing to have. Now, this is the game changer, 802.11 AC. How many guys have actually started screwing around with this at all? Anybody start playing with AC? Okay. Yeah, I was in yours yesterday. AC is going to really be the big one, the big game changer. Gigabit wireless is the unofficial name of it, although that's what everybody's going to start calling it. Gigabit throughput in full duplex, and you'll see why on the next slide. So some of the things that we're going to talk about in 802.11 AC. First of all, it will only operate in the 5 gigahertz range. It will not operate in 2.4 at all. There are more channels, it's less crowded, and everything else. And there will be an AC, there will also be backwards compatibility with D and G on it so that you can run them. But the AC itself, you want AC speed, you want AC capabilities, that's only going to be in the 5 gigahertz. Bigger bandwidth in the channels, 80 megahertz as opposed to, I believe, 40 for N. Yeah, so it's quite a bit more channel bandwidth. It does support heavy error correction coding, and it has the beam forming, which is what we talked about. So it does support the MIMO addition. But here's the big thing. Multiple antennas, multiple transmits and receive simultaneously. Up till now, all wireless has been, you're talking to the device, to the AP, to the device, back and forth. And everybody has to take a turn using CSMA-CA, collision avoidance. So you only can transmit one at a time. With the multi-user, you can actually support multiple simultaneous connections. This is how we're getting full duplex on wireless today. So what you're going to do is you're going to see your access point. Now, a lot of these antennas are going to be built in. You're not going to have like 8 dipole antennas hanging out of the thing, although in theory you might, but I haven't seen any that look like that yet. Most of them are built internal to the unit. And what you can do is you actually can have multiple antennas on your devices. And this is how, again, we're going to gain extra speed. We're going to gain more throughput. Now, is there a downside? Yes, there's always a gotcha. First of all, AC is a much smaller coverage area. 5 gigahertz does not have the range of the 2.4 gigahertz, doesn't have the penetrating capability. Ergo, we're going to need more access points. When you do your site surveys, if you're going to start putting AC in place of BG and N, you're going to need more of them. And you're going to have to be very conscious of where they're placed and what possible interference there can be. Now, okay, I'm still looking. So in access points, the thing that you actually connect to your network, now I'm talking access points by themselves. I'm not considering the router switch access point combo, other than the access point capability. There are 2 types of access points. Fat access points are typically your access point with its own intelligence. It has its own firmware, it has its own capabilities, and it runs autonomously from any other access point within your site. The other are the lightweight or the thin access points, which simply have the antenna and the transmitting. These two, these are both thin access points. These are from Trapeze, which is now owned by Juniper. This is what I'm going to show you. These are based on controllers. So one controller manages all of your access points. So you manage them. This way they're all on the same SSIDs, they're all on the same channels, and they support roaming and other factors as well that we'll talk about, some of the management characteristics.
Do they have consumer yet?
I have not seen anything in the consumer side of it. Well, let me rephrase that. Yes, there are in the consumer, but at very high end, and it's not something you can go to Best Buy and purchase. But there are a few companies that are making, or that are repackaging, I should say, lower priced controller based.
This brand runs all on the same channel? So access points on the same channel?
Yes. Oh, the question was, do they all run on the same channel? Yes. So you set up the one channel you're going to use. Now, you could set up multiple channels if you wanted to, but they would be considered like on a separate, you know, in other words, you couldn't roam. If you walked out of one. The SSID, actually, they will all have the same SSID, but each AP will be named a different name. It's one SSID and you just roam through.
How do you support 802.11b?
The question was, how do you support 802.11bg if you don't have the 2.4? They actually have the 2.4 radio, but it's almost like having another access point inside of it. So that's how they're supporting both. They're actually putting both sides. Tim?
Well, I just want to point out, you know, we have some, it's really hard to see anything that's B at all. I thought even anything that's B. And, you know, thousands of devices, they won't find any that are B.
Yeah. Tim made the comment that there is almost, on their surveys and their site surveys, what they've seen is virtually no B network and very little G at this point as well. The wireless LAN controller I mentioned before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Now the really cool thing is, and this is what City College of San Francisco does, they're actually putting all of this management in the cloud. So if you wanted to run a large scale, and I bet this will eventually hit the home market as well, but if you wanted to run a large scale environment of wireless, you wouldn't have to have the controller on site. You would simply contract with a cloud provider and you just supply the access points and the internet access. They give you all the management tools, it's all web-based. That's what we saw yesterday in Tim's presentation, is how City College does it, and it does it extremely effectively. I think that's going to be a major change from what we've seen in the past on wireless. Also, how do you get the power? One of the problems that everybody has, or at least they say they have, is, okay, I can put an access point in the ceiling, but how do I get power to it? How do I get DC power? Well, these particular access points, just like most of the thin access points, run PoE. There is no power running to them. I have a simple little PoE switch up front, and it's picking up the power off of those. So depending on how many of them you're going to get, you may need a switch with more oomph, like a higher end Cisco business end switch that supports PoE. But PoE is actually a very, very good technology out there. Most PoE devices support a very low power consumption. There is another IEEE spec, AF, which indicates the standard by which power over Ethernet to your access points should work. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead talking about things like basic service sets and advanced service sets. The idea is, do you have one access point, do you have multiple access points, or do you have no access point? And I'll leave this in the presentation, but I want to skip ahead. There, okay. So I've skipped over a lot of the technical stuff. I'll leave it in the presentation. That can be viewed online. But I want to get into it because I want to get a few minutes to maybe show you some of the stuff that I've done. Okay, Windows connection process. This is what generally happens. A device will scan for an access point. You know, hey, I'm looking for somebody. So when you do your list, okay, here are all the access points I see within your range. Pick one, and then you will authenticate with it. We've done that a gazillion times. Now, there are two processes. You have to authenticate, then you associate with it. Now, most of the time, the authentication is, hi, I'd like to connect to you. Okay, you can connect to me. Then you associate. Now, if you add additional security, like with WEP or WPA, WPA2, there is then a next step, which is apply the security. But you authenticate, you associate, then once you've associated, then an IP address will be delivered back through the access point to the device from the DHCP server.
Am I correct in assuming that most of the business class devices can authenticate to LDAP or?
Correct. LDAP and Radius are the two most common. In fact, I'll talk about Radius in just a second. When you transmit, we use DCF. Is actually part of the protocol. I'm not going to get into a lot of it, but it's the distributed coordination function, and it supports the coordination of the access between the access point and the device itself. Now, most of us, when we're teaching, like if you teach a Cisco class or if you teach Network Plus, you're starting to talk about Ethernet, the MAC layer, what's happening down at layers 1 and 2, and you talk about CSMA CD, carrier sense multiple access with collision detection. You can't do that in wireless. You can't detect. So you have to avoid a collision. So we have to use CSMA-CA. So what happens is you sense that somebody's talking, you can't talk. When the person who is talking stops talking, in Ethernet, you jump on right away. And if there's a collision, oh well, you detect it, jam, and fall back. But in CSMA-CA, when you detect the collision, I'm sorry, you don't detect the collision. When you sense the wire has gone quiet, you then wait. Everybody waits a random amount of time. There's a random number generator built into the protocol. So everybody waits. Now, we're not talking hours, we're talking milliseconds. So, but everybody's going to wait a slightly different gap. Once your gap, once your little space is up, you jump on. And the odds of somebody else having exactly that same random number and jumping on at the same time are statistically negligible. So that's how CSMA-CA works, and that's how we avoid collisions. It's kind of like, yes, when you look to see that the freeway's clear before you jump on the on-ramp, but then you wait another second because you don't know if you missed somebody coming at you at full speed. You were mentioning the acknowledgement frame earlier. That's what happens. So what happens is when the device sends a, I want to talk to you, or I'm talking to you, you will get back a series of acknowledgments, just like with most Mac level protocols. Now, one of the reasons N can get a little higher throughput is you don't acknowledge every frame. You send a block of frames, and then you acknowledge the block of frames. So you get a lot better throughput in that respect. Because remember, once you transmit, you got to wait, then get the reception of the acknowledgement, then you can start up again. Okay, couple of tools. Now we're going to get into some of the stuff that you can actually start using in your classroom. Now, one of the best tools to teach wireless is a spectrum analyzer. And I know what you're going to say. Thousands of dollars, can't do it, forget it. There is a small device called a Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi device is a small little USB spectrum analyzer. It's very cool. It costs about, I want to say about $250 to $300. They're very, very nice. And to show you a sample of the output, this is the output from that program. And what you can do is you can monitor your channels. You can actually see what's going on. You can't actually read the packets, but you can at least see it. And you can judge if there's a lot of noise in it, or you can find the best channel that's open in your area. This is a wonderful tool in the classroom. I know at $250 to $300, you're probably not going to buy one for every student. But having maybe 2 to 4 to 6 of these in your classroom for students to use, and what you do is tell them to walk around the campus with a laptop and see what signals it picks up and where. And then tell them to go over near a microwave and then turn it on and watch it light up like a Christmas tree.
MPICT's actually got another tool that's better than the channelizer for spectrum analysis. I can't think of the name of it, but that's the name.
Yes, this is made by a company called MetaGeek. Yes, so the question was they have a better tool for this. You're right, I haven't had a chance to play with it yet.
They have two. One of them doesn't have a built-in antenna, and one of them has an external antenna.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use the external antenna, what it does is it basically you can plug in an antenna, a beam or an antenna, and it will look for where your interference is.
Oh.
So it has the ability, but you have to turn off the antenna inside your laptop.
Okay.
But I've used those for about $80 for the real cheap one, and it's really, they just want.
Okay. So just to summarize, I know that's very simple. If MetaGeek is the company that makes these, and they have a lot of really cool products, I suggest going out to your website. You got one on yours?
Yeah, this is on the Android. I looked up products and analyzer, and there's a couple of free apps.
Oh, cool.
If you're Linux, you don't need a dongle.
Oh, that's right, you don't. That's right. If you have Linux, you don't need the dongle.
We should mention Insider, which is made by the same company, which is free, which is really something you might want to show students before you get to this, because it actually defines the channel. I
do that. The comment was there's a program, again, it's a free download from the same place, and it's called Insider, and it's like SSIDER. Definitely a cool tool to show in your classroom. But this is one of the tools. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it. All of us know Wireshark. How many of you do Wireshark in your classrooms? Great, yes. Wireshark, great product. Now, Wireshark can be used on wireless, but unless you have a promiscuous, I love saying that word in the classroom, a promiscuous wireless device, you will only be able to intercept your frames between your laptop or your device and the AP. You can't see all of the other frames floating around. There is a product called AirPCAP, 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 if you can Google it. Again, not an inexpensive device, about $400. More than that?
They range from, I think, 400 to 1,000.
Well, I know that they started at about 400 for the cheap ones.
Yeah, but you don't want the $400 one. The $6,000 or $1,000 one. But if you go onto eBay, you can buy them out of China for $1.99. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Comment was made that from the official site they are very expensive, but if you search eBay, you might be able to find it for a little bit less money. I'll make that politically correct.
And for Wi-Fi, you can buy their dongle. There's a competitor for $35.
Okay, there are competitors. Anyway, so if you get a couple of those and are using Wireshark in your classroom, then you can actually capture multiple packets from multiple sources for analysis. Again, another excellent tool. Okay, now my favorite topic. Usually this is the stuff that Carl does. Now it's the stuff that I normally do. I usually come in and I start talking about security, the bane of existence. Every IT manager I know, myself included, looks at Wi-Fi and goes, wow, Wi-Fi is neat, but none of you can use it. We want nobody using it because it has a lot of built-in, inherent insecurity, lack of security, no security, holes. So when we're dealing with security, we have to deal with authentication, which is verifying your user identity, username, password, and so on. Authorization, which is granting access. You may be authorized to use the network. I'm sorry, you may be authenticated on the network, but you may not be authorized to use some facility on the network. And then accounting, which is the ability to track activity on the network. So those are the 3 A's that we talk about in wireless security all the time. There's a lot of really cool tools that you can work with your class. There's Wi-Fi finders. I mean, every smartphone I know has an app to see what, who's out there to do some war driving. Wi-Fi finders, probe requests. Here's a great site, http://www.wigle.net. Wiggle. What it does is you put in a zip code, and it will show you all of the access points that have been detected in that area. It's amazing to look at all of them, and you'll see them by name, by channel, etc. Now, for unauthorized access, how do we get it? Again, the rogue access points. One of the things that I always get in trouble with at my school is we are constantly plugging access points into the school's backbone network. And it constantly sets off the intrusion detection alarms. And the infrastructure manager looks at it and says, oh, damn, it's one of SACHEC's again, and he ignores it. But we had a huge problem that faculty needed more wireless, so they'd simply go to Fry's, buy a $29.95 access point, plug it into the school's network. Yeah, we got into some heavy trouble on that one. Other things that you can have security problems with, RF jamming. That's basically throw in enough interference so that nobody can use the wireless at all. Data flooding, denial of service attacks, so to speak. Hijacking is another one. Exploiting. WEP is a great tool. It's a great example of how bad security can be. Social engineering. Hi, this is President Tom Smith. I need specialized access to the network. Sure, Dr. Smith, we'll give you access. Remote administration. One of the things that a lot of people forget to do on their access points is turn off remote access, or at least not secure it in some way. And hey, if I can get to your AP, I can run you. Eavesdropping, war driving, net stumbler, man-in-the-middle attacks, and evil twin. Evil twins we actually do in class. We actually played with some exercises in there. What an evil twin is you have somebody that's connected to an authorized access point. Then what you do is you send out a disassociation packet so that they're disassociated, and then you set up your machine, your rogue machine, so that it has the same SSID and you force them to reconnect or reassociate with you. And now you've taken over their computer.
What do you use to demo that?
There's some things in, oops. There's some stuff in Backtrack. There's some tools in, well, what's the new one? It's Kali, thank you. Yeah. What's the tool? There are some tools in Kali that do it.
So I know that Cisco has it, but does that have the equivalent of Bear Marshall in the Juniper?
This particular one does not.
Okay.
This is a fairly low end. This is probably their entry level devices.
Level Cisco one, which is, who is a company that they bought?
Meraki.
Yeah, it has Air Marshal.
Yeah.
And I tell my students, get one of these so you can mute your neighbors. Right? Same idea. But is that legal?
Probably not. I always like to say probably not legal. Covers me. Authentication requires that the wireless device and not the individual be authenticated. This is very important. Wi-Fi is really, really insecure because it's the device that authenticates with the access point, not the user. So if I've got a computer that's authenticated, that's already been authenticated, anybody can be on that computer and do anything that is authorized for that particular account. So one of the things we're going to have problems with is in the mobile device arena. We are going to now have to not just authenticate the device, but now we have to look at authenticating the user. Many of the managed controllers devices nowadays, they actually have a login. We talked about Radius a second ago, LDAP, Active Directory. Some of them will integrate with Active Directory as well. Some even it will allow you to set up a local database on the device. This one will have supports Radius, but you can also use it as just have a little database of names and passwords. Okay, 3 security mechanisms were all the Wi-Fi Alliance figured you needed at first, or the IEEE needed at first. SSID hiding. Well, that lasted about 15 seconds until everybody figured out that, yeah, you're not broadcasting the SSID, but it's still there. And it was easy to get off the network. They said, okay, then we'll do MAC filtering. We'll say, if you're not the right MAC address, we're not going to associate with you. Well, that took about 20 seconds before they figured out you can spoof the MAC address into the frame as well. And then they figured, okay, we'll do encryption, and we'll do WEP, wired equivalent privacy. An oxymoron, if ever there was one. It is not equivalent privacy. WEP is horrible. So we have to make sure that we are guarding. One of the projects that we do in our class is we crack WEP less than 5 minutes to crack WEP. In fact, I make a contest of it to see which group of students can crack WEP fastest. I've actually got a couple of groups that actually got it down under 3 minutes. It's in Backtrack. Yeah, all the Backtrack stuff. It's Sam's exercise. It's Sam's lab. Okay, so they came up with a better protection model, WPA, much, much better. 2 variations, personal, enterprise. Personal, very small office, home office. This is what most of you would probably use at home. You set up a shared key between the device and the access point, and it does encryption end-to-end, and it's a very, very good protocol for what it is. There's also an enterprise version, and that's designed to run against generally a Radius server, and it will generally use a higher level of encryption protocols. WPA2 is the new one. This is actually 802.11i. This is actually 802.11i. There are 2 modes that have been set up in the IEEE standard for it. Again, personal and enterprise. Personal shared key, enterprise usually being authenticated on the back end with a Radius server, LDAP, Active Directory, or something like that. WPA2 addresses encryption and authentication. AES is used as its encryption protocol. Very strong, very secure. And it requires, if you're going to be using the enterprise, it does require a Radius or Radius equivalent service. It is a very, very strong security protocol. If you can use it at your home, if you can use it at your schools, etc., this is what we need to be teaching on security, how to set up and manage WPA2. So here's just a real quick description of how 802.11i operates. I'm going to skip ahead if I may, because I'm down to like 5 minutes and I want to get to this last bit. I'm going to skip security tools, but things like VPNs, to teach students that VPNs are very, very important when it comes to wireless, because now you can really ensure encryption all the way across, especially when you have mobile users who are accessing public access points out in the Starbucks of the world. Okay, so a little quick summary. WEP should not be used in any production environment. WPA does have a few security weaknesses, although I have not heard of any cracking of WPA short of brute force. As far as I know, it hasn't been cracked by an algorithm yet. And WPA2 has not been cracked, again, other than by brute force.
Can you go back one slide? You said WPA is not secure with PSK?
It's not as secure with PSK. And again, that is based on the concept of it's a shared key. Actually, one of the big, you know how you screw up WPA security? Because you have to give everybody the key. You give everybody the key. And they give it to everybody, and they give it to everybody, and they give it to everybody. So the problem is the key sharing.
So what's the fix for the second bullet sentence that you have there?
This one?
Yes.
Oh, the thing is, if you change your key all the time, if you go in and change your key, that takes care of the oversharing. But the problem is most people don't do it. It has to be done manually. How did WPA do it? Radius backend. You have to authenticate at the user level in addition to. Okay. Last couple of minutes, I want to talk about what we actually do in our classroom, or what we have done, what Carl and I have done. We do use the Mark Schiampa book as our textbook, and we use the Cybex book as an alternate to prepare the students for the CWNA test. These are the chapters that are in Mark's book. It is an excellent book. With most course technology books today, they have plenty of instructor materials as well. We have developed a whole bunch of labs. These are the labs that Carl and I have written and have used, and we've vetted them, and we'll probably be giving these to the CTC as well. Just some examples. I'm not going to read them all to you. These are the labs that I ran in my class last semester. These labs. Most of these labs take anywhere between a half hour to an hour. Some take a little bit more.
Are those available now?
I'll be happy to give them to you if you want.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have, or at least what Carl and I have done, is we do a skills-based assessment at the end. In addition to a final exam, it's very important the students know how to do it. So what we do is we give them a set of hardware, a couple of laptops. They have 2 access point routers running DDWRT. How many know of DDWRT? Okay. If you don't know about it, if you happen to have the right brand of Soho router, it is a wonderful firmware replacement. It gives you just about everything you can get in a higher-end Cisco device, like an AP1200 or an AP1300, without having to pay nearly the amount of money. You can create bridges. You can use radius servers. It's cool. If you haven't had a chance to use it, I had a demo. I am not going to have time. I apologize. But if you want to send me an email, I'll be happy to show you some of the stuff that we've done with it. But they have that. Then we have 2 Cisco bridges. And what the student has to do is set up the access points, set up the bridges, and set up security. So then they have to set up a radius back end, and they have to then authenticate. And they have to do it with no book. They can use their notes, but they have to do it without the books. And that's their big project. I break them up into teams of anywhere between 2 and 3 students, and they just do it.
Can this be done with simulation on the material, or do we need the actual hardware?
I have the actual hardware, which means I've never tried to do it in simulation. It'd be an interesting, I believe you can do it with Packet Tracer. If you're a Cisco Academy and have Packet Tracer, you might be able to do it. I don't, like I said, I'm sorry, I've never tried. The question was? can you do this in simulation? And the answer is, I don't know. But I'm willing to try it if somebody wants to volunteer to help.
In your course, how much of it covers this type of infrastructure you see in a larger industrial and commercial environment versus home?
The question was, what do you do for the enterprise level? That's where we get up into, even though it looks like it's only one lab, it's a big one. But setting up a wireless controller with access points, that's these guys. Yeah, that's where we get to the trapeze, because that's what big companies do. So they have to set it up, they have to set up a radius server, they have to set it up with a router on behind it. So yes, they have to do all of it in this one lab. This is the biggest single lab that we do. Takes probably almost a whole class session. So that's the answer to that one. We also, something also with radius server, stuff like that.
And you talk about square footage and planning strategies and that kind of stuff.
We do a site survey, conducting a site survey. For site survey, actually, believe it or not, I make them use just NetStumbler, and I do it mostly by hand. I want them to do it mostly. Yeah, I know there are tools that do it much better. The question was, what tools do I use? And the answer is pencil, paper, and NetStumbler or equivalent tools like that. They do some more driving and when we walk around. So it's not very high-tech in that respect. I wish it was, but okay. There is a certification when Cisco kind of bailed out of the wireless market. CWNA kind of came back in as an entry-level certification. This is not the equivalent of CCNA wireless. That's at a much higher level, and it's also a Cisco proprietary. This is a vendor-neutral, entry-level certification, although the group, the CWNP group, has a number of certifications beyond this one. But this course prepares the students for CWNA's PW0105 exam. And again, it's just another cert that students can put into their bag of tricks. Okay, real quick, and I'm going to finish it up. 60 years ago, video was delivered via broadcast television. Okay, we all know that. 1980s, video shifted to satellite and cable. Now, the next generation, and I am convinced of this. I'm not prescient, I'm just one of the voices out in the wilderness. But I am convinced that CBS, NBC, ABC, all the cable stations had better get on board with internet streaming, because that's where we're going. Everything is coming in over IP. I know a lot of cord cutters, and wireless is going to be on the forefront. 802.11ac now gives us the tools we need to be able to deliver super fast wireless access all over the place. Okay. Thank you. I don't know how to turn on the lights. I'm going to probably screw up.